Okay, all set. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Barb. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee. First on our agenda is we'll approve our minutes from previous meetings. And then we'll go ahead and I'll review the agenda before we get started. So let's start with the approval of minutes. First were the minutes for August 27th. I move that the minutes from the Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee meeting dated August 27th be approved. Can I get a second?
Second.
Who was that? Wayne?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Second. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approval, if you could raise your hands. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next are the minutes dated September 10th. I move that the minutes from the Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee meeting dated September 10th, 2020 be approved. Can I get a second?
Savian.
Savian, second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, aye. Just raise hand. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring up the agenda.
PowerPoint, 1 second.
Barbara, you controlling this? Yep, there you go. Well, next slide. All right. So we will we'll review the charge statement as we do every meeting. We will update, we'll talk about the update to responses to the questions from the last meeting. And then we're gonna, the exciting part of our meeting today is to hear from our partners on the restorative justice practices. That'll take up most of our meeting this evening. And then we'll end by talking about our plan for the next meeting to really have a thorough conversation around restorative justice and policy. And then we'll also talk about next meeting dates and proposed agenda items, and then we'll adjourn. So let's start with the purpose charge statement. There you go. So just a reminder, our ad hoc committee is responsible to really talk about what needs to be in place when schools reopen as far as safety and security. How are we going to reallocate of resources and the resources needed? And then review and make recommendations regarding our current Board of Education policies. And the policies are, we talked about them briefly, 4224, 4147, 4400. And there you go, next slide. And so just to talk about our timeline here so today we're going to be covering the restorative justice, the current state of restorative justice in the future state. We will, next meeting, October 22nd, what plans we need to move forward on budget and policy recommendations to the board, and what needs to be strengthened, what additional information do we need to make these decisions. And then just a reminder, this is the process that the MMSD uses to really identify what a safe and welcoming school is. And that is in these areas of preparedness, response, recovery, and prevention mitigation. The Q&A document with responses to the questions from the last meeting was sent prior to this meeting, so you should have that. We will continue to add questions and answers to this document as they arise. And then our next Q&A will address restorative justice, current and future state of MMSD. And just a quick question on, before we move forward, is let us know if the Q&A document is not helpful. If you're not getting your questions answered, and if there's a particular area that you feel that we need to have a conversation, a more thorough conversation about with during our meetings, just let Savion and I know, and Mark, and we will get that set on the agenda. But please let us know if the Q&A document is not helpful, if you still have follow-up questions, and we will get that addressed. Any questions about that? All right, well, let's get into the most interesting part for our evening today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to, is it Lori or Vanessa?
I believe it's AU.
Who? Okay.
Yeah,
Who is
Okay.
going? Who's going
I'm gonna share my screen.
Yes. Okay.
yeah, Vanessa is gonna be sharing the screen and then I'll start.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you and welcome everybody, and thank you for the space. This is Restorative and Transformative Justice presentation, and from in collaboration with YWCA, Dane County Time Bank, MMSD, the Restorative Justice team, and Freedom Inc. as well. It's very important, and I think the next one, Vanessa? No? Yeah. So to start with, we wanted to recognize and acknowledge why are we here. We are not here because there was an ERO ad hoc committee. In the past, we presented a very similar presentation that you all are going to be seeing with the same approach to the ERO ad hoc committee, and it didn't go anywhere. The ad hoc committee did a lot of harm to a lot of abolitionists in this city. I want to acknowledge that we are here because police brutality and institutional racism are baked into the policing and criminal justice systems of this country. The education system is disproportionately hurting Black and brown kids and families. This is not just our history, this is our present day. I would like to bring into the space for us to have present the devastating murder of George Floyd at the hands of police officers, as well as the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony Robinson, Tony McDade, and countless other Black Americans. And I would also like to recognize today the struggle and the resilience of Black abolitionists and the movement for all Black lives that must be at the center of our collective liberation. We are honored to witness the leadership of Black abolitionist youth in this city, in this land and place, leading the revolution, a movement towards Black power and liberation. Black liberation is collective liberation. It is youth who are showing us what the future can be. Let us recognize and honor the intergenerational movement of Black abolitionists, which has and continues to shape the roads for liberation, justice, and love. I would like to also recognize all the work that the Freedom Inc. Youth Squad has done to advocate so that we can, be here and having this conversation, so that police wouldn't be in our schools. That's why we are here, because of all this struggle. So let's have always that present, and let's make sure that this ad hoc committee is not the same as that ERO ad hoc committee, that actually real and true transformation from the people, by the people happens. And
Thanks, AU. We wanted to start by framing our conversation, our presentation this evening with these pedagogical stances that have been identified or developed by Dr. Maisha Wynn. And just by way of a little bit of context, Maisha has strong connections in the Madison community. She has done restorative justice work in our schools. She has worked in the English Ed department at the university, and now she and her husband are they run the Transformative Justice in Education Center at UC Davis. So in her book, Justice on Both Sides, Maisha identified, in the book she had identified the 4 pedagogical stances that you see on the left. And since then, she has added the outer ring, that futures matter. And she considers these the lens that we need to look through, kind of our frame of reference for all of our restorative justice work. Our work needs to be guided by the deep understanding that futures, history, race, justice, and language matter. And I would say that while some understandings of restorative justice are large enough, deep enough to kind of hold these understandings, these pedagogical stances, I think in many ways can also be seen as a bridge between a more traditional or maybe a bit narrower understanding of restorative justice and transformative justice. So we'll be using this framework in different ways throughout our presentation as we talk about history and race and justice and language and futures. And I think with that, I am passing off to Bianca.
Yes, so can you all hear me okay? My internet has been acting up today. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the historical context of how we got here, what things contributed to our current policies and practices, and how we interact and deal with young people. Does somebody want to read that first paragraph? A volunteer?
Savian, I can do it.
Thank you.
So institutionalized oppression begins with the fact that BIPOC encounter, which is by Black and Indigenous people of color, encounter a comprehensive arrangement of language, rules, processes, and requirements, which they had no role in creating. Compliance is mandatory and based on a set of rewards that may not be desirable. Participation is compulsory. The decision making is a strict hierarchy. History of the relationship between Black people in Western political, economic, education, financial, and other institutions.
Thank you, Savion. So it's really important that when we're evaluating our school's values and policies around safety and discipline, that we situate it in a larger historical context. There's a reason why we respond to Black and brown children in punitive ways. We are colonized essentially and brainwashed into believing that these students are inherently violent and harmful, and that the only way to correct this is through punitive practices and policies like police and cages and detention and in-school suspension and expulsion and all of those things. And again, that is really shaped by white supremacist narratives and culture. A lot of the rules that we have in our school have little to do with safety and more about power and control. For example, I hate those dress code policies that tell Black girls that they're being too fast or inappropriate by wearing short shorts. That is about upholding white supremacy and patriarchy and not necessarily safety. Because if it was about safety, right, we would spend more time teaching young Black girls about consent and body safety, and not that their clothes and their bodies are a distraction. So historically, Black children have not been considered children. They've been, and currently are seen as criminals that are a burden on the state, schools, and other institutions. So this is a timeline and that came from the Haywood Burns Institute and CJNY, which Freedom Inc. is a part of, and I think the YWCA too, that outlines the history of youth criminalization, essentially. So we won't go over this whole timeline, but we'll highlight just a few things. If we could scroll down. And I do really encourage people to look at this timeline, to spend time with it, and to ask questions. So in 1944, the United States actually murdered a 14-year-old child. So we did not see him as a child. We saw him as a danger to society, something that needed to be punished, something that needed to be criminalized, something that needed to be violated in order to keep white America safe. And we can scroll down to super predators. So many of us are familiar with the term super predators. Hillary Clinton made it popular, but we cannot blame the ideology on her. It's an American ideology that says like Black children are inherently criminal, and they're inherently deviant, they're inherently violent, and we need to put these rules, we need to put these policies in place to keep, again, white America safe. We have examples of this when we're talking about the Central Park Five. Many of us have seen the documentary on Netflix, but they were not believed, right? They were seen, Black men, Black boys, Black children, seen as sexually deviant, seen as violent criminals, seen as people that needed to be locked away and put to bed. So other examples of policies that we see that directly connect to the policies and practices that we have in our schools today are zero tolerance policies, the 94 crime bill, broken windows theory, the war on drugs and mass incarceration that really bleeds into the way that we think we need to work with young people. And if we're really committed to dismantling those systems, then we really have to get out of the status quo mentality of punitive policies. And the only way that we can solve harm is by canceling Black children, Black and brown children, essentially. Some other important notes is that restorative justice is like currently being used as a quick fix and band-aid to quote unquote behavioral problems, but it really does not work like that. You can't just send a kid to a restorative justice room expecting them to come back transformed. Restorative justice does not work like that. It is a collective process that really takes time and trust. Also, if we're truly committed to restorative justice, then we have to start first by addressing the institutional harm, and be committed to a 360-degree accountability process, not just like a liberal form of punishment when kids get in trouble. Young people and families should also be allowed to hold teachers and school personnel accountable as much as we hold our young people accountable. And this should not be appropriated or co-opted by institutions, which is unfortunately what happens. Again, we just want this quick fix to these badass kids, and that's very anti-Black, and that's not the true nature, that's not the true vision, that's not the true community, Indigenous, POC-led version of restorative justice. So if we're gonna half implement it, we're gonna get half results. And more money and resources really need to be poured into it for it to be successful. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that from the team? Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Bianca. To expand on that a little bit, it's important that we recognize that language matters. It's important to have shared definitions in restorative justice that helps move the collective towards an action of justice. At the YWCA, we have our own definition of what restorative justice means. Restorative justice is an anti-racist and decolonizing movement rooted in Indigenous knowledge that recognizes the interconnectedness, value, and worth of all parts of creation. It aims to interrupt and dismantle the cycle of harm through the medicine of collective radical vulnerability and love. Restorative justice recognizes the need to heal, repair, and transform the historical and transgenerational harm from our society's practices and systems of retributive and unjust law embedded in white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalistic culture. Restorative justice is about nurturing relational, interconnected cultures and empowers communities to meet our needs and mend the relationships that make us whole. Next, I'll pass it to, I believe, Lori to talk about the time bank's definition of restorative justice.
Thanks, Orion. So this is the Time Bank's definition of restorative justice that was brought to us by Dr. Demita Brown, our Restorative Justice Director, in collaboration with folks. So restorative justice is a community-based approach to justice, which promotes a strong sense of community, belonging, safety, and unconditional human worth as the primary response to harm, conflict, or other social problems. It focuses on repair and healing. This work is guided by a proactive 360-degree model of accountability, mutual responsibility, unconditional human dignity, and respect. Grounded in the view that all members of a community are worthy and interdependent, the practice promotes community building, self-awareness, empathy, equity, and freedom. By opening space for the long-term commitment to personal transformation and collective agreements, abolitionist restorative justice works to address deep patterns of harm caused by institutionalized racism and to eliminate the disparities that this causes.
Thanks, Lori. And just to get some voices and other voices in the room, this is another definition within the restorative justice framework from the little book of Restorative Justice in Education. And can I have somebody read the first paragraph, please?
I can, Lori, I can read it unless somebody else wants to. Okay, justice honors the inherent worth of all. It is enacted through relationships. Primary justice, sometimes called social justice, is the condition of respect, dignity, and the protection of rights and opportunities for all, existing in relationships where no one is wronged. Secondary justice or judicial justice is understood mainly as a response to harm or crime.
Thank you. Could I have somebody read the paragraph starting with restorative?
I can read it. Restorative as an adjective for both primary and secondary justice describes how an individual's or group's dignity, worth, and interconnectedness will be nurtured, protected, or reestablished in ways that will allow people to be fully contributing members of their communities.
Thanks, Vera. So thinking about the definitions from the YWCA, Dane County Time Bank, and then also from the Little Book of Restorative Justice, just wanting to hear from 3 or 4 people in this space, what are some words, phrases, sentences that really stood out to you when thinking about these definitions around restorative justice?
I would say repairing the harm that was done to the victim.
Thank you.
I would also say justice jumps out to me.
Can we hear from 2 more people?
Yeah, I think restoring the individual or group's dignity, worth, and interconnectedness stood out to me.
And then one last person, anything that jumped out from these definitions?
That justice. I don't know if y'all can hear me.
You cut out a little bit if you want to repeat.
And honors the inherent worth of all.
Thank you. Now we're going to make a transition to start to talk about transformative justice and what that means and looks like.
Transformative justice is an approach for how we, as individuals, families, communities, and society, can prevent, respond to, and transform the harms that we see happening in our world. A defining feature of TJ is its commitment to change the conditions in order to prevent further harm. And this definition comes from Generation 5. They are a transformative justice abolitionist organization. And this is really important because there's a huge emphasis on changing the conditions. So for example, if we saw a young person stealing bread from the grocery store, right? We wouldn't call the police. We would question why this young person is having to steal food or having to take food from the grocery store. And we would say, the harm that happened isn't him stealing food. The harm that happened is food insecurity and food injustice in this country. And that is what we would ultimately try to shift, rather than focusing on this young person's quote unquote behavior. Are there any things that stood out from this definition from three people?
I would say getting to the root cause of why the person committed the offense or the crime, and look at it from that standpoint versus one of just a punitive nature, trying to understand why the person did what they did.
This is Gloria. I think for me, what stood out is changing the conditions in order to prevent further harm.
Yeah, just to go off what this is Savian, what Gloria just said, but changing the conditions, behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum, and there's context that, is the backdrop for behavior, which is really important.
And this is Karen Kepler. In addition to that, it's the word commitment, to actually commit to changing the conditions, to me is what surfaced when read.
I think the respond to part is important too, because often responding to a situation either heightens it or can bring it to a better place.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide.
So when we think about transformative justice, we also have to think about transforming what safety means. Often when we think about safety, it's historically and currently rooted in white supremacy. It's historically and currently rooted in the violation and the violence against Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so we really have to commit to shifting our definition in order to disrupt and dismantle what safety currently means in this current state of education. So the transformative justice principle definition of safety is, we believe that safety is not a state to arrive at, but a dynamic, set of questions, choices, and skills that allow each of us to exercise agency, making choices, owning those choices, reflecting upon the outcomes of those choices, and letting our learning inform future actions. Absolute safety is not a guarantee, and risk is inherent when we resist abuse of power. However, resistance can be an act of courage when chosen with full consciousness of the potential. So really thinking about, especially with this ad hoc committee, of really transforming the culture of policing in itself to make us safe. And also expanding that, whether we're talking about police, security, or even other staff within educational buildings can take on that form of policing. And so we really need to think about, what do we need to disrupt in order to be in alignment and in connection with this definition. And so we ultimately really want to think about safety as a sense of belonging, especially when we're thinking about our Black and Brown students within school buildings. And so we're just going to take a little bit and hear from a couple folks. And we're actually going to make sure, I can't see everybody, but if there are youth on this committee, putting youth at the center of this conversation first before the adults answer this question, if the youth feel that this is a space that they would like to share a response. So thinking about a time where you might have felt deeply safe, and then what made you feel that way? First, I will invite if there's any youth that would like to share first before opening it up to the adults.
I just want to reiterate that everybody who's part of the committee needs to have their video on, even though your mic is off. Thank you.
Are there any adults that would like to answer this question? Think of a time when you felt safe and what made you feel that way.
I'll go. Probably for me, the time I felt the safest, I think back to first moving to Madison as a 12-year-old, being in 7th grade, going to O'Keefe Middle School, and there was a program run through the Atwood Community Center. I think it's a restaurant now, but it used to be a community center on Atwood, called BEAST, Brothers Effort Against Social Turmoil. And it was run by Barry Davis, Cliff Davis, Arthur Morgan, and some other folks, other brothers over on the east side. And they would take a group of us. They had a van and they would pick us up, and they just created a space for us to be young men, to have adult role models who we could connect with, have tough conversations with us, allow us to build a sense of brotherhood. But also a lot of us in that group did not have adult male role models in our homes. And so, it was just a sense of safety and a sense of security, and a bond with not only the adults, but the other young men who were in the group that has lasted with me through in the adulthood. So.
Thanks, Marcus. Can we hear from one more person, youth or adult?
This is Gloria. I think, for me it's very similar to what Marcus is saying. Is I remember the Loft in Madison, where it was a place very similar to Atwood, where there were people who looked like me, other students, people who work there who look like us, who really just let us be who we were, and very not restrictive, and just allowing us to be us. It really felt like one of the safest spaces that I can remember being a kid. So yeah, very similar to what Marcus shared.
Thank you. So really thinking about how those two experiences really talked about a sense of belonging. There was nothing that said punishment was what made me safe, or a staff member who was policing the body or my emotions that was making me safe. It was really about that connection. So we're going to move on to talk about what accountability can look like.
Yeah, thanks, Rochelle, and thanks for sharing, Marcus and Gloria. I mean, I think spaces that you're talking about in terms of non-judgment, where you see yourself in that space, where you feel like you can be yourself, and creating that sense of belonging, that is safety, that creates safety. And then what we talk about here is a little bit more of a punitive model. And as Rochelle said, in none of those cases was it about policing or rules or different things like that. It was freeing. So accountability in this current white-centered colonial status punishment. So what are some examples of punishment that we see within MMSD? How do we see accountability in the school? In a power structure, how does that operate? Who can make who accountable within MMSD? What identities, roles, and practices and systems do you see within MMSD? And what we're really trying to think about is, how are we treating each other within these spaces? So what what kinds of examples, if there are a few people that want to share anything associated with any of these questions in terms of who holds who accountable in MMSD, what types of punishments do you see within MMSD, any of these questions? There's a stark difference between this framework and the framework of safety by creating sense of belonging that Marcus and Gloria were just talking about. Does anyone want to share anything that they can think of associated with these?
I mean, I don't want to control this conversation, but I'll step in to get us going. I mean, I think for me was, you know, which we don't do anymore, but it was clearly a reason why I ran for school board was each time I went to my children's school, I always saw a Black or brown child sitting in the hallway outside of the classroom alone. And it just frankly really just, it was so disturbing to see. And they were all Black and brown children for the most part. Every time I walked into my daughter's school, my son's school, you know, that was happening. It doesn't happen anymore, but that's an example of how we punish behavior in MMSD.
And if I could just piggyback off of what Gloria just said, I agree. I mean, I've been my kids were in the district starting in the early 90s, and it was apparent which kids, in terms of when we talk about examples of punishment, which kids in the district were receiving the most punishment. As Gloria mentioned, you know, walking in the hallway, you can see kids outside, they're not engaged, they're not in the classroom. And so it was pretty apparent that that was just some of the examples of the types of punishment that the district was using. And from the 90s and before that, the disparities in terms of out of school suspensions, expulsions, all of that has been consistent for many, many years within the district.
Anyone else want to share anything?
I would also add that, this is Vera Napati. I would also add that grading practices are institutionally a form of punishment where teachers' biases really intersect with student learning and doesn't always accurately reflect what a student is learning because of those biases.
Thanks. So what I'm hearing a little bit here is about practices of exclusion and isolation and the biases that show up within these, the back to you know, what Bianca was talking about earlier in terms of the criminalization of Black youth specifically. So yeah, thank you for sharing, everyone. And we will transition a little bit, I think, back to Rochelle.
Thanks, Lori. So this is a visual, and I think people who just spoke lifted this up. So when we think about what's happening in schools, it's not within a vacuum, it ripples out to the community and vice versa. And that it's not something that is new. So somebody referenced the 1990s and it's 2020 and the article titles are the same. The studies that come out are the same. What youth are experiencing in their communities and within school structures are the same. And it's not just locally. We are known nationally for some of the worst disproportionality when it comes to our Black children. And we are named constantly one of the worst places to raise Black children. And when we talk about grading and standardized testing and things like that, that our students are not given access to educational opportunities and also are perpetually harmed within classrooms, which then has a direct impact of how students feel a sense of belonging and a sense of engagement. So just taking maybe 20 seconds just to look at some of these titles, as I said before, they're shouldn't be new to you. And it doesn't matter what the year is because it's something that happens every single year in terms of what violence is happening to our Black students in terms of how they are perceived in schools. So as we take in some of these headlines, really thinking about what actually needs to be shifted within what we have control of in our community, within this institution and outside of this institution. And so I will pass it on to the next person to talk about accountability.
This is me, Eugenia. I would like to, bring into the space accountability, but within a restorative and transformative justice framework and philosophy and understanding. It's a powerful tool for transformation. It's not a one-time event. So it's not like one circle, it's not like two circles, but it's an ongoing and evolving process with multiple actions that are relational, intellectual, emotional, material, and spiritual. It's a collective process. It's a collective transformation. This is very important, we can't make someone accountable. We can only create the conditions that make taking accountability more rewarding and compelling than avoiding it. It's not shameful, and it has to be rooted in belonging, connection, and safety. The goal is healing for everyone. Accountability through a restorative and transformative justice framework also takes power into account. So power matters. It matters. Identity matters. History matters. So all the different things that were put in the framework from Maisha Wayne matters within accountability process. And when we are talking, so we have to definitely take into account the power. That's why it's so important that accountability processes are led by the people and by the community, for the community that it's being most impacted. So representation matters. Cultural responsiveness matters. It's disrupting this cycle of harm at the same time that we are also healing. So it's not by hurting back, which is like accountability within a punitive accountability, which is white-centered and embedded in white supremacist capitalistic patriarchal culture, hurts back. So whenever we're like questioning, are we disrupting the cycle of harm or not? I'll pass it to Lana.
Right. Thank you, Au. So the word on the slide here is mindset, transforming mindset. But I think maybe words like values and beliefs, maybe even words like awareness and humility are maybe better descriptors of what we're talking about here. This work is deeply rooted in those things. And unless we invest the time and the effort and the heart in this ongoing work of personal and collective transformation, I think our efforts will be slow and shallow at best. And sometimes they may even create further harm. So we're going to take just a few minutes here, about 5 minutes here, to hear the story of kind of that story of that internal personal transformation of one school leader. So whenever you're ready, Vanessa, thank you.
Question here, then I'm going to ask you a question. So that actually leads right into my question for Ms. Steele about your transformation. And you suspended students. So in reality, to get that, you need the school leaders, the principals themselves. If the district isn't doing it, it's because they don't think their principals are going to do it, and they're afraid to push on their principals. They're afraid of their principals because they have a lot of power. And so I want to find out, how'd you go through that, your transformation? What'd they call you?
Well, I used to be referred to as the suspension queen. I remember when I started out earlier as a principal, I moved to this one school, and when I took over the reins, I had a list of 11 African-American males. And that list said, these kids have to go if you want to run this school. So within the first 12 weeks, I had suspended and DHP'd 12 African-American males.
DHP is a referral for expulsion.
So after that, I started looking at myself internally, not from the outside, but internally. So there has to be that transformation to where we come to the realization that suspensions aren't working. So why are we doing it over and over again? It's more work, it's more time, it's not helping anybody. Attendance rates are going down, the whole bit. But yes, it has to begin with the leadership. And we have to come to terms with who we are. We have to look at our cultural proficiency level. We have to look at our assumptions about the students that we are serving. And once we do that and truly begin to look at that piece, that's where the transformation begins. None of the things could have happened at Ralph Bunche if I hadn't become a transformed person myself. So that's where the leadership, that's where it all begins, right there with the leadership.
And if I can just sort of riff on that. I was working, or my organization, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, which actually did the first pilot program in Oakland that was so successful in reducing suspension rates by 87%, completely eliminating violence, increasing test scores, that the school district became very interested. And with some organizing by youth by 2010, just a couple of years later, the district adopted a resolution adopting restorative justice as official school policy. So what I was going to talk about, Ms. Steele. We were at a school doing another pilot program, and Ms. Steele was the suspension queen at that school. She did a training with us and even said things like, oh yeah, this will work for our kids. This will work for our kids. And this is not unusual. But that paradigm shift of responding to youthful wrongdoing in a restorative and a healing way rather than a punitive way was hard to come by, even with that verbal buy-in. And for Ms. Steele, I think it was yours actually sitting in a circle that allowed you to make that shift, that paradigm shift. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about that?
You can hear about it, you can see it, that's objective. But once you sit in that circle, that's when the transformation really begins, because you begin to trust at a different level. You begin to appreciate others at a different level. You begin to give yourself that space to be who you are when you sit in those circles. So that's really where it begins. And when we talk about that shift from the inside out, it changes the way you think when you sit in those circles. It changes the way when you change the way you think, then you begin to change the way you do things. And the one thing that those circles taught me in that transformation process is relationship. So what you saw there is that relationship, and the circles allow you to tell your story. And as you're telling your story, then you begin to learn how to allow the students and your staff and others to tell their story. So when we move to that place to where we become humble enough, it's really about cultural humility. When we become humble enough to back up, be able to tell our stories, then and hear our stories, then we learn how to hear other stories, and then is when we begin to connect.
One more question.
Orion, I think, no?
Oh, I didn't know. I guess it's me. Our vision for restorative justice at MMSD is radically transform school communities where students, staff, parents, and caregivers are safe, feel they belong, and are actively engaged. All variations within the identities of race, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, language, ability, nationality, immigration status, age, and class are honored. Each member of the school community is deeply valued and provided with what they need to be healthy in relationship, learn, grow. The educational experience affirms each person's authentic self and inspires them to be bold in exploring who they are and who they might be as members of their communities. Next is a comprehensive list of things that we would like to see. I'll start off by reading the first two. What do we want? By the community, for the community, outside of the institution and outside of the state. Co-creation of a new document with community control to replace the BEP and eliminate the punishment model. What does this look like? Practices, processes, and policies rooted in transformative and restorative accountability and healing. Dedicated restorative spaces in schools.
I'll go next.
Okay.
RJ and accountability. The RJ and accountability process requests must be available to everyone. That means everyone in the school community, youth, parents, and all school personnel. Ongoing community oversight on policies and practices. A youth-led accountability process for when adults harm young people.
I can go. Eliminating exclusionary practices such as suspensions and expulsions and safe rooms. Expand and resource restorative and transformative justice with the elimination of police in schools.
I can go next. Shared power, implementation, and accountability between schools and community organizations, dismantling white supremacist culture, systems, and structures in schools and among staff.
And go. Sustained multi-year funding not tied to white evaluative systems. Eliminate culture of policing, the policing mindset. Accountability for the spirit murdering. And this comes from Dr. Bettina Love Talks. We continue bringing speakers to the district that, say these things. So we really are speaking like from what she said that we should be doing. And bringing community, that. And the next one.
Okay, you could have continued, Ayu, but I'll close this out here. Bringing community into the schools who reflect the values of Black students in school, the creation of home places, the home places that Dr. Love talks about, and processes for 360-degree accountability for all, identifying, reflecting, and bringing things forward.
And that concludes our presentation.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Now we would like to open it up for questions from the group and engage in some dialogue and yeah, that's now. And we have an hour, so that's good.
Yeah, thank you all for that presentation. Very informative. And thank you for those recommendations. And yeah, we do have an hour for discussion, questions. So let's go ahead and open that up.
So I guess a big question I have are, what are examples or ways we think we can implement, systemic 360-degree accountability, from a systems perspective or a policy perspective.
I can start. So one of the many things that Freedom Inc. our youth have been demanding from the district, in addition to removing police from schools, investing in youth, and using transformative justice, is a model around community control, which is a new democratic way of thinking about accountability. So it's not just that grown people can hold young people accountable, but our young people can hold their school, their teachers, their principals, their school personnel accountable as well. So in the same way that we have a community oversight committee that was just passed by the city of Madison, we should also implement something similar into our district, a committee that's ran and led by young people and adults that they've most impacted young people, right? So we don't get to handpick the kids who get all A's and who follow our lead and do everything we say. We want to pick the kids who have been most impacted by punitive policies in our schools, who have arrest records, who barely show up to school, all of those things, right? Because those are the young people that are going to lead us into thinking about schools in a new revolutionary way. So in the same way that the city of Madison passed a community oversight board, the school needs to consider the same thing, a committee led and ran by young people and adults that they identify, that they trust, to hold the school accountable when harm happens.
So I guess my question is how this actually happens in practice, and how do we build the capacity and make sure that, and I'm talking about restorative justice, right? I mean, I think when harm is done in our schools and they move through a restorative justice practice, like a process, what are the accountability measures of whether it's working or not? What do we need to build the capacity? Like, I think I'm good with the theory of it and the why, but how do we actually implement this in a practical day-to-day? And I know it's being done, but is it working? And what do we need to, if it's not working, what do we need to build the capacity?
I can chime in about one piece, and I'm sure many others can chime in about pieces as well. But one thing that we see a lot is, the woman who was talking in the video about like being willing to be vulnerable and being willing to share yourself and being willing to share your part of it. A lot of times when things happen in the classroom, the youth feel harmed too. And we currently have processes where we do not have adults that are saying, I might have caused harm here, and they don't participate in the process. So part of the challenge is it's really hard to get to real resolution when we're not utilizing like that 360-degree like sort of mindset where conflict isn't, and things that happen, it's not just one person that needs to be held accountable, it's all the stuff that comes into it. So in order to be able to truly like really get at some stuff, we all have to be willing to participate in the process, and we don't see that right now very often.
I'd like to jump in real quick too. And I don't want to overstep and speak for the RJ folks who are experts and in the room, but I also think as somebody who's in the schools, in a high school, from a school perspective, I think when we're thinking about trying to figure out whether or not it's working, we have to define that, right? And we can't define that within the framework of what already exists, which is reducing suspensions and things like that. Because again, thinking about it through that lens, we're going to try and produce certain results. that are rooted in a white supremacist ideology of what discipline should look like. And so I think we got to really take a step back and think about, when our schools are safe for our most vulnerable kids, what do we want that to look like? And then reverse engineer that backwards, right? So if we didn't have to suspend kids, right, what would we want to be happening, right? What would we want that school to look like? How would that school feel to our students? And then that's how we'll know we're working, when we start seeing that we're moving towards that model and that vision. But we got to come with that vision first, if that makes sense, of what we want, and then kind of start to work backwards as to how do we get there and start walking that road.
And I was going to build a little bit off what you said, Mark. I mean, you said it perfectly, but I was just going to say that when you talk about success, like you said, it comes from sort of this lens of white supremacy all the time, right? And what success looks like for one student looks different for somebody else. So the fact that a student may be able just to even commit to say, I'm gonna come to class, that's a success, so I think we got to be careful in how we're sort of moving and maneuvering when we're talking about success, because success is going to look different for each kid. I've, too, experienced what I call sort of the magic of being in a circle process. And when it's done right, in terms of the vulnerability all around, and it's in a circle for a reason, right? So that there's sort of like this level playing field, if you will, of everyone. You start to see beyond, and I think Wayne mentioned it earlier, you see the behind the picture, right? You see the behind the behavior. You see that this child hasn't eaten for days. You see that this, child is going through this at home, or, whatever. And it helps you to see the bigger picture, right? That it's really not about, the punishment is not going to do anything for this child. But what is going to do something for this child is to provide some necessities, like maybe a home, or to provide food, or to provide that sense of belonging, because they don't have it anywhere. So I think, what we're trying to say here is like that the work of restorative justice is the work of building relationships and building community. And the way that I think it's been done, unfortunately, the wrong way, is that it's used on the end of, in connection with punishment, which it will never work that way. So when you connect it to the BEP, when you connect it to anything that has to do with policing, suspensions, any of that, it messes up the intent of what it really is meant to do.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, both Vanessa and Marcus, for bringing that, clarifying that for me. I think that, where I see it is that, we've had restorative justice practices in our schools, right, for some time now. And I still feel, and maybe it's because of the connection with law enforcement, the connection of discipline and the BEP and all that stuff, that I feel that we are still losing kids, that we are not serving kids in a most, holistic way, right? And so I think, and I realize restorative justice is one component of so many other things, but I just feel like there's some sort of disconnect in that, we are not seeing, and maybe we have to change the metrics or change how we evaluate, right? I mean, because like you're saying, it's like, it's under a white supremacist system, right? And so, well, then I want to see and hear about, okay, yes, so this child was experiencing this, but now this child has been going to school and attending classes, and that's what we need to measure, right? I mean, I think we need to measure based on what we feel, right, that's separate from the white supremacy sort of culture and thought about how we measure our children and how we measure success and so forth. I mean, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I just feel like we're missing something, that we're not using the restorative justice practices as robustly and as a commitment all around for our children right now. And I feel a sense of like disconnection, and I'm just wondering, how do we bring it so that we are supporting our children in a holistic way?
I just want to say three things. I know everybody else is like, I'm gonna get in. But I just want to say quickly that one, you have to fund it. One of the major things that's happening is that we are super underfunded. So we have like a 0.8 here, a 0.4 person working here, but there's not a robust, dedication to funding to restorative justice. If you had that, because, we had Fania Davis come here and she talked about kind of their approach. And she's like, we put money into an entire one school just to pilot it. And when they had all of that they needed in that school, that's when they saw transformation. So one is that it's unfunded. Two, what I made the connection between, it's tied to the wrong thing. So when we go back to what we were talking about in the presentation around language being important, I think language is hugely important because we're still saying practices, right? So when we're saying restorative justice practices, there's something around that to me that feels a little still kind of, I'll just say white supremacist. Like it's like this thing like, okay, this is what I need to do. These are the steps, the box I need to check, instead of what we're asking for and what we're trying to do is a culture shift. So that's a whole different mindset when it comes to restorative justice. It's not sort of a checking of the box. It's like, we're totally changing the culture of the school, that when I walk in that school as a young Black woman, I feel like I belong here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, we have a long ways to go with that. So I just want to mention those two things as a response.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. I think if there was a light bulb thing that I could push on here, I think the culture shift is huge. I think that is what it is. Okay, I'll stop talking. Anybody?
And if I could just, piggyback quickly on what Vanessa was just saying, that is so critical. And there has to be that buy-in, right, for restorative justice practices or processes or however we want to define it. But there has to be that buy-in from the staff, from the students. Everybody in the school has to buy into it. And from what I'm hearing, there are a lot of people who don't buy into necessarily the restorative justice practices, because I think it's just what Vanessa pointed out is we're looking at it, we're engaging it from the wrong end. It should be more of a preventative type thing versus a punitive thing. Once the harm is already done, now we're trying to reverse and correct it. We should be looking at more preventative practices when it comes to restorative justice issues as well.
If I could jump in. Oh.
I think it was Lana and then Lori.
Sure. I was just going to name one of the pieces that I think is part of the disconnect, Gloria, that you named, and I think Vanessa and Wayne have already touched on it. But I think part of it is that beliefs and values and mindset piece. We can do everything we can do to create systems and structures that support this work, to teach people an understanding of the actual practices. But to the extent that we don't shift who we are as human beings, how we see ourselves in relationship to each other, and the kind of environments that we create out of that, I think we're going to continue to see what we've seen. And part of this, I think, is really continuing the need to continue to more closely help people to see more closely the connection between all of the work that we are doing and need to do around racial justice. These two pieces cannot be separated. And so I think that investment is long and it's slow and it's deep, the mindset piece, but I think that's part of the disconnect, of the reason why we still are where we are with this.
Great.
Yeah.
And then Lori?
I think that shift in terms of how we're measuring it and where we're looking at it, and the mindset shift that people are talking about, we're also talking about the link, like racial justice, like Lana is mentioning, racial justice and restorative justice are directly linked, and utilizing restorative justice to do anti-racism work and to do racial justice work for community building. And when we look at who's getting suspended, who's getting expelled, who's getting ticketed, and the disproportionality with that, we can't not do anti-racism work. That's it. So, a lot of the work that we've been doing with restorative practices lately is restorative justice lately is linked with work with adults on unpacking anti-Blackness within within people within those buildings. And, you know, Mr. LaRosa is here, the principal from La Follette, and we've been doing work over there too. And when you talk about a culture change and a culture shift, that's a big piece of it. I don't know if you want to share anything, Devon, but feel free.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're partnering with Time Bank, and just like, I do want to say, like, my silence isn't to just simply be silent, but like, as a staff, I don't want to monopolize the time, but it's not for lack of having something to say. I'm a high school principal. If you know me, I'll talk all day if you'll listen. But the biggest thing I will say is, you know, we're talking about like buy-in, and it really isn't buy-in, it's a belief. And I'm on my phone because my computer died. But the biggest thing I will say, when I heard someone say it's underfunded, like, the way we get restorative universal is through training, right? And does training come with a cost? It can, because it takes a lot of people to train 168 people, but you don't force it. You have to help people understand that it's a belief, right? Because if it's buy-in changes. I bought into something, and then I quickly changed my mind on something. So I mean, we're working with Time Bank, and we're doing trainings, and we have been doing trainings, and we're doing more trainings. But I mean, I think that's the key in my mind, helping people see the paradigm shift, right? Not who did this, but rather who owns this and what does the person need. I think those are like the key parts for me. And I believe Mr. Strong said it when Maisha Wynn in her book, Justice on Both Sides, talks about, like, we don't want to be in the area of repairing harm. We want to be in the area of not even being there, right? Proactive community building, right? And so just when we started out this first 2 weeks, there were no grades in the grade book, because we asked people to focus on community building, right? If we're good with each other, then there's no harm to repair. We're good, right? And so, and it was that enough time? I don't know. Maybe we spend 4 weeks on community. Maybe it's embedded. Maybe we never stop, right? But I think, I mean, but you have to get people to the training, which to move from the buy-in piece to the belief piece, grounding in this common belief. I'm gonna stop.
I just want to chime in too. I really appreciate, Devon, you jumping in. I'm wondering if any of the other school-based people who are doing this work and who are partnering with our community partners who are here today would be willing to talk a little bit about what's going well, or how the work in your buildings is going.
Before we go there, Hinia, did you have something earlier? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Gloria. I just wanted to, like, you know, I mean, appreciate a lot of what has been brought to the space, and but I also want to say that, like, when we question whether restorative justice works or not, and that we know what we are doing, punishment doesn't work, actually hurts back, is doing a lot of harm. And then we engage in restorative justice, you know, trying to do with the very little people that are here right now, right? Trying to, like, a whole district, and we have little capacity, and then we're expected to change things in one circle, and like, oh, restorative justice doesn't work, let's go back to punishment. But we know punishment doesn't work, and there is research that tells that punishment doesn't work. It's racist. It hurts Black and brown children. We know there is research, like just right now, Fania Davis was talking about it. We heard a principal talking about it. We see it happening in Oakland, that even passed a resolution about its transformation. We see it happening in Minnesota, and we still question, but does it really work? Is it really something that can? I think that we need to just stop, you know, continuing like building committees, questioning, like, you know, within the institution, and just really start funding. And something that needs to happen for this work to work, besides what everybody has been saying, is that systems that perpetuate harm have to be dismantled. So restorative justice being tied to the BEP, for example, as a consequence, when we culturally still consequence is tied to punishment, it shouldn't be happening. Restorative justice should be more at the forefront, so that when everybody has the opportunity to experience restorative justice as a way of interconnectedness and culture, we need to dismantle punitive systems that still exist, and not just continue thinking, oh, let's do it slowly, like with the police in the schools. Let's just start preparing the ground so that police wouldn't be. Why wouldn't we just stop systems that are hurting children? Like expulsions, for example. Expulsions are one of the most shameful processes. Expulsion hearings are awful, and they get a lot of money. Are the most shameful processes for a family that have to go through. It's like a court. Why are we doing this to children? Why are we doing this to families? So those things need to go down. Also, that will allow us to redirect funding. When you take the money that is like put into these punitive processes, redirecting funding to and shifting roles of people that are really rooted in engagement and in connection. Something that happened in Cherokee, which is one of the schools that we have been working for already like a lot of time, is the principal, not the one that is right now, but the previous one, took the decision that instead of like shifting the role of a dean into a community and family engagement coordinator. That shifts mentality. Also, then there was like that shifting in transforming the school and investing in engagement, in relationships, and not in punishment. Also, something that needs to be also taken into account for this to work is time. There is never time to do this work. When we are in the schools, there's never time to engage in this. There's never time for anybody to engage in this. We're always trying to find time, to find space to do this work. I would like to share an example for when I was an in-house coordinator in one of the schools. There was something that was going on in one classroom, and the teacher was a believer in restorative justice in that school, and we engaged in a restorative justice process with her classroom. It took us six weeks, like around 7 circles, divided it, but this teacher was really committed in healing her classroom, and not just with the sense of urgency of going through the curriculum, because students were not feeling that they belong. So she really wanted to do this, and we did it. And then at the end, actually, relationships were healed. And I know that this is, I don't want to like, oh, it's a success story, but I want to share that when the belief and the time, and we value relationships more over tests and what the system is asking for us, we can start building transformation. And this is one classroom. It's really difficult to do this work when all these things are not in place. And when we have systems, punitive systems, a BEP, that doesn't allow us to engage in transformative and restorative justice processes. So
Thank you.
Can I pop in real quick?
Just a second. Who was that?
Marcus.
Oh, Marcus. Martha, did you still have something? Yeah, I saw your hand raised earlier.
Yeah, Marcus, if you go ahead.
Hey, Martha, you're breaking up too. So, okay, let's start with Marcus, and then I'll bring it back to you.
Just to follow up, a lot of great points. As a school-based person, I think belief is really important. And the comments around time and those things are super important. The thing I want to say is that on top of working at people's hearts and their spirits, like I can believe I'm a fish, but if I live in a tree, swimming is hard, right? And so we have to think about the systems, right? So like we've been talking about attaching it to the BEP, right? And this is me speaking, 7 hours a day, 7 classes a day, starting at 8, getting done at 4. We got to look at some structural things in the water that we swim in. When we talk about creating a restorative culture, it's not just what people believe. That is a part of it, but it's also some of the structures and systems that are in place, because again, I can believe whatever I want, but if the systems that I'm operating in don't give me the time and the space to effectively do those things, and that's what I find. I'm as someone who believes in this to their core, but the tools that I have are the master's tools, and they will not dismantle his house. Okay. And so like, we have to make sure that the things and the structures that we're giving people to operate within are going to also nurture the work that we want people to be doing. And so it goes deeper than just, and also it can't be like the add-on, the extra piece, the lipstick on the pig type of situation where we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, but we're going to add in restorative practices or whatever to say we're doing something different. It has to be a whole overhaul of how we're going to do business if it's going to get the results that we want to get, right? And not this like, let's pick this part of, let's cherry pick what we want to do. So I'm gonna fall back, but that's.
Come on, Marcus. I just want to say, come on, Marcus.
That's great, Marcus. Thank you so much. Martha?
Let me know. Is my internet allowing me to talk, or should
By turning your camera off and then speaking.
Yeah, Martha, try turn off your camera. And then, are you still there?
Is this better? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yep.
Yay. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. I just wanted to chime in for the kiddos with disabilities, like the whole IEP process sometimes I don't think is as inclusive as it could be, because sometimes the kids who have more reactive behaviors are not getting introduced to the people who are going to be involved during those times of crisis in a safe space. Instead, whoever's going to be involved in that when that is going on is almost getting introduced to the negative side of that student, rather than being introduced to how that student actually is, on their normal day, having a good day. And so I know that the IEP table is a protected space for parents and the kids and the team to talk about things, but if we are more proactive in offering the time for the parents and the students to meet anybody who might be, in that area, or, part of that reactive situation that may or may not occur. I think it should be offered more often so they can create that connection prior to just all of a sudden creating this fear, maybe when they see this person might be getting involved if I react in a certain way, instead of this person is my, this person can be my friend or help me when I'm in, when I need them. But then I know that is available to parents. I do not believe all parents know that though, but maybe it's something the school should consider having the caseworker at the table offer to do that as a positive note, just so they can know that there's more support at the school for their child.
Great, thank you, Martha. Anybody we haven't heard from yet? Okay.
I can share just based on like what we're doing at East. I agree with what a lot of people have already shared, and just a lot of this work that I've seen in high schools is person dependent, right? It's who is in the building that has those skills and knows and is like working to push this forward. When I was at La Follette, we had a team there of a lot of people who were trained and who were pushing that work forward. This year at East and last year, one of the things that we've really been working on too is kind of like building up like the naturalness, or just like staff being comfortable with being in circles and bearing witness with one another. And so a lot of our equity work is us sitting in circles with each other, learning from each other, unlearning, and like moving forward. And I think that has been something that's really helpful. And from my experience, staff who traditionally don't buy in to restorative justice, or don't, they see a circle and they're like, I don't buy into that. When they're in them and they're able to see the power that comes from them, that is something that's been really helpful. So I do think that, we're moving forward. East is moving forward as a school because our staff are in that every single, at least once a month. And we're talking about hard things and we're having tough conversations with each other, which allows to pull in then student voice and allows to pull in community voice and other people, so that people are they're more open to hearing other perspectives and what's happening around them. And especially when you're talking about, we're talking about racial issues and equity and things like that. And those are some of the most touchy subjects right now. So if staff are able to do that with each other, then how can we continue to build capacity so that they're able to then sit with students and do some of this transformative work? Because that's really what needs to start happening. And I think we're getting to those places, but it has to keep going. And we have to have our leadership at East is like buying into that. And they're saying that this is important and this is valuable. And so that needs to be something that is also pushed. When you think about time, like staff need time to be able to do that and to be able to sit in a circle, and our staff have that. So I want to just acknowledge like that's really important, and that's not something that every school is doing. And we've seen a lot of value in and a lot of growth in our teachers and our staff in general, because it's not just teaching staff. It's, SEAs, it's secretarial staff, it's, our BEAs, it's our security that are all there as well.
Yeah, Ms. Hutchins, we're doing the same thing at West as well. And also with that, once a month, we have a Region Pride lesson, which is based around anti-racism. And so we're feeding into the classrooms, and the students are having discussions around that as well. In regards to restorative justice, our restorative justice lead is being pulled in so many different directions. She doesn't have the time to actually do this work the way it needs to be. And as far as our staff as a whole, like the principal at La Folla said, and Vanessa, if we can get some funding and to get some help with some training for our staff, because we'll do it for one day, then the staff go back for 1 week, have this restorative mindset, then 2 weeks later, they're back to their old ways. So we have to figure out how to build on this work so we can actually truly have a shifted mindset in our staff. So if we can keep coming in and having these lessons and these trainings, so we can continue to grow as a staff and as a community here in Madison.
I have a question for the general group. When I asked about these, how we systematize these concepts of 360-degree accountability, and Bianca mentioned, empowering a student panel. How do we think staff would be receptive to that? I understand that it's one thing to get that belief there, to get that paradigm shift in thinking, but how do we think, in terms of, as Corvan alluded to, we do one session of professional development, then 2 weeks later, people are back to their old ways. So implementing that accountability mechanism made up of people that it's affecting the most.
Can I speak, please?
Please do.
Hello, Coach, is that you?
Yes, this is Coach. I just wanted to know if I was able to speak, please.
Yep, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I just want to talk about the totality of this accountability we talk about. Freedom Inc. Are comprised of some of the most incredible women on earth. Props to Brandy Grayson as well. And I've always said that, and I fully believe it, or I wouldn't say it. But I have to ask, as a straight Black man, I see, how can so many people that enjoy protective class status somehow position themselves as in a silo as the leaders of what the total Black experiences is? Because I want to talk about experiences. I couldn't wait to get off work to go down to the Doyle building to watch the magnificent work of Freedom Inc. But when I got there, I watched you get to demonstrate behavior that would get Black men in the building fired and Black youth, especially Black boys in the building, expelled. And then as I come to these meetings, I'm wondering, it's so readily apparent that there doesn't seem to be, and a lot of people have talked about this and a lot of people won't say it to you, but I don't live in a world where I'm going to eat something and not grow from it. So I have to say it out of respect to you, but much more out of respect to myself. I don't see any place where the voices, the concerns, and the contribution of straight Black men have been respected and appreciated in everything we're trying to do, because the original, we're talking about reconstructive mind changing. That's just coming from a mom and dad or an uncle and an aunt, people that you can go to, that's going to give you 100% honest, talk to you and build you, inspire, and watch you aspire to something. It's not punitive, it's not pedantic, but it's always going to be there to support. But I don't see where the contributions of Black men who have stabilized buildings, not by themselves, but have stabilized it. Like, I'll give you an example of something. In our building at La Follette, before Devon got there, we were under the regime of the worst principal in the world, in any solar system, in any galaxy. But it was Tony Gennaro, Tian, Jennifer Johnson, and then it was JaVale Higgs, Mr. Flowers, myself, Kyle Bowman, Michelle Olsen, and a couple other, and it was also Cullen, believe it or not. And it was about 6 Black men, 3 white women, and another white guy. We held that school down. And we did it because we're parents, but we did it mostly because we're humans. And I watch organizations who can operate within certain parameters and not get penalized, somehow position themselves as the speakers of Black culture. And I have to say I object to that, because in so many cases I've seen people from Freedom Inc. act like they can't even recognize or look at a straight Black man, and yet somehow you tell me that you somehow respect and honor and want our Black and brown children to grow, but you can't even recognize or even respect Black men. I remember how humiliated I went down there when I watched you do your incredible work. Everybody went down there like I was the enemy, and I was down there championing you. And I see so many people who don't look like me talk about what's so harmful to the Black community, and yet we're trying to do this in these silos where you say you love and honor and you want to uplift and inspire Black and allow Black and brown children and our and queer nation to uplift and inspire themselves, but you can't respect or even recognize the contribution of Black men. And I find that very offensive, and I have to say it. Not because I've already said how much I respect the work you do, but I'm asking why it seems like you don't respect the work Black men do in these buildings.
Okay, thank you, Coach. I think so. I think this conversation is amazing. I just love it. And I'm so glad that we're leaving our next meeting to talk more about restorative justice. I think what I'm curious about, Vanessa, you mentioned earlier about a school that has done a sort of culture shift. And I'm just wondering where we can find more information about that school.
Gloria, at some point I will want this conversation to continue. I just want to put that out
there. I'd like to respond to that.
Okay, can I just get, Coach, I just want to get where I'm going here.
Okay.
How we can actually do this culture shift within MMSD around restorative justice. And who's done it, right? Who's done it? Get some best practices. I want to know, like, who has been able to change a culture within their school district or within their own school, and what it took to get there. And so I'm just wondering if that's information that the Y or one of our partners can get to us, so that we can bring that into our next conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We can send you some information.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
All right, Coach. Bianca, you want to respond to Coach?
Yes. So one, I appreciate your accolades for our young people. Freedom Inc. is a Black feminist and queer-led organization. Historically, Black women and Black queer folks have been left out, intentionally left out of leadership, left out of movement spaces, left out of collective Black community decision-making, right? And oftentimes, historically and contemporarily, a specific focus on Black women and girls and queer folks has led people to assume that there's a inherent exclusion of Black men and boys, and there is not in our movement. Again, we are Black women and queer led, but Black women and queer led in our definition does not equate or cannot be compared to historical movements led by Black men that intentionally left out Black women, Black queer folks, Black young people, Black poor people's voices, right? So the way that Freedom Inc. organizes, the way that our young women and queer youth organize, does not align with any type of respectability politics, does not align with expectations around around how Black women, girls, and queer folks should behave. We do direct action to raise a crisis of consciousness and challenge status quo. So yes, our young people cuss, our young people yell, our young people use their voice because they have been ignored, both within our community and in the larger system of white supremacy and the larger institutions. However, that does not mean that it's exclusionary. It means that it centers, right? And I quite frankly I'm missing the connection of how us showing out, disrupting, being loud, using our revolutionary ways of self-organizing and community organizing means that there's an exclusion. Again, centering does not mean exclusion. Also, we walk in the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, if none of us are free, none of us are free until all of us are free. That means when our Black queer people are free, then the rest of us will be free. That means when Black poor folks are free, then the rest of us will be free. That means when Black people who are currently in cages, our political prisoners, are free, then the rest of us will be free. But that does not insinuate exclusion in any way. It means that we're centering, right? If we're centering Black LGBTQ youth, that does not mean that we somehow are forgetting about Black girls and Black cisgendered young people.
That was beautifully said.
And I would love to have a one-on-one conversation, because I'm really big on inter-community conversations. Instead of, we Black people, we are smart enough to deal with these issues. We are smart enough to build within our community, and white folks actually don't have any place in deciding how we lead our movement. So I would love to talk more one-on-one with you, and I'll reach out soon.
Okay, let me finish. I honor and respect you. I want to know that, because it took so much courage for me to say that, because the first thing people try to, I'm sorry, can you hear me? Anybody?
Yeah, Coach, we can hear you.
Okay. The first thing people try to say, if you talk about race, you somehow must be racist. If you talk about queer nation, you somehow, no, none of that. I just want to know, because I sincerely feel this. I want to have a conversation with you, incredible people, women, queer nation. But I have to ask you that let's not forget that a circle is also closed, and we can expound and enumerate all day about what we actually do. But you have to ask yourself, if the perception is that you're not doing what you say you're doing, it has to be some self-evaluation, because there are many people in this school system who somehow feel strong when they can talk behind somebody's back. I don't live in that life. I have to just bring it to you as a Black man who witnesses, especially Madison, think that we can heal the racial injustices and inequities in silos. And we do that because we've been trained by the white supremacist system into thinking that, well, they're going to pick the Negro du jour, the Black person, the Black issue of the day, to exploit and pretend like they honor it and edify it, and all they do is merchandise it. And we do that all day. We have been taught to act like crabs in a barrel in order to get funding that we talk about, all while we ignore and disregard the fact that we truly, no matter what we say, we really are in this together because we Black folk. Because the last time I checked, queer, straight, gay, or whatever these ridiculous European terms are, we all still get shot in the back and somebody puts a knee on the neck. So that's why I had to ask you, because when I would leave work to go down there and watch you guys whoop ass, but there is an inequity if that's the same behavior that we demonstrate. And we get fired for it. So we want you.
Coach, can you just close up here? Because we got to get moving
want
on.
you to fight for us. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Am I talking too long? I apologize.
Yeah, we got to
Yeah,
close
yeah.
off. I really want to just focus on, I appreciate the conversation. I think we all recognize that we all come from different spaces and experiences, and we're all not going to agree, or, you know, things are going to come up. I think Bianca has really, you know, thoroughly explained. You have, and I think there is an opportunity for the two of you to discuss this offline. I really, but again, I don't want us to not have these conversations because, you know, we're concerned or scared of them. I think that they're relevant. I think that we should have them, but I really do think that we need to really focus on what a restorative justice, how can we come together? What is it that
can we say we're actually advancing if we don't have real conversations?
Right, Coach. I'm not saying that we're not going to have.
I'm done. I understand just what I'm working with. I'm done.
I think we are going to have real conversations. I really just want to make sure that when we are having real conversations, that they're about the topic in which we are talking about at this very moment in time. And if this is
but isn't that what our school system does?
Restorative justice, because that's the topic of our.
This is restorative justice. Isn't that what our school system does? Is gloss over things and give credibility and fidelity to things that really aren't important while we walk around at issues. That's why we have
Coach,
a 50-year.
Coach, we're not walking around the issue.
I'm not talking about you in particular, but in this Madison Memorial School District, this system ignores the things that we should have talked about 20 years ago, which is why we're here now. I just don't want us doing it anymore. And out of respect for you, Gloria, and Savion, and everybody in this meeting, I would love an opportunity to talk to all the wonderful women in Freedom Inc.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Coach. I think that, you know, where Vanessa and the team came forward with us is really talked about the real issues around our implementation. I won't say practices, our restorative justice culture within our schools, and how can we move forward to ensure that we don't continue to harm our Black and brown kids within our high schools or within our schools in general. And so I think that this was a really good conversation. Thank you all so much for the presentation. Vanessa, Eugenia, Lori, your team, Orion, am I forgetting who else spoke?
It's Orion. I just want to correct you.
Right,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Orion, Bianca, Rochelle, Lana.
Yeah, Bianca, okay. Thank you all for your presentation. It was very informative. We have a lot of work to do. There is no doubt about this. But I am confident that moving forward and learning what we've learned today, that we can actually build this culture of restorative justice within our schools. It is so important now more than ever to do that. I still have, you know, concerns and questions about how we deal with some of the things that happen in our school, right? I mean, like, just the reality, and you guys can't throw anything at me because we're not in person, but like, you know, the kid who brings the gun to school, right? I mean, or you know, things of violent nature, right? How do we move forward on those incidents? Because those are the incidents that I'm concerned about. I mean, a kid who brings a gun to school, there are two, like, are there other options besides the current, you know, direction that we have, that we go through, right? I mean, I think Karen Kepler and her team, you know, will have to really figure out, like, what is the mandatory process that we are obligated to operate under as a school district, and restorative work in our schools. And so that's just a hard sort of decision that I think we have to make. along with building the capacity within our schools on restorative justice, so that maybe we can prevent those issues and challenges and violent incidents that happen in our schools.
Yeah, and just to refer back to the definition of transformative justice, it's about changing the conditions. So, when a student may bring a weapon or things of that nature to the school, speaking from experience and research, it's almost always out of protection. So why does that student feel a need to protect themselves? And what are the conditions that they feel threatened? And how do we address those conditions and change them? I think Bianca had something to say as well.
Yeah, I think this is important to include in the analysis around weapons in schools. I think many of us, including myself as a former school teacher, we're scared of like these mass school shootings, like a Columbine or a Parkland. But it's really important that we lean into an analysis and data instead of leaning into fear, right? School resource officers can actually stop an active school shooting. And we've seen numerous examples of this, the recent school shooting in Kentucky, the recent school shooting in Texas, the recent school shooting in Parkland, Florida. The school resource officers were present and they couldn't stop an active school shooting. And when we think about the demographics of a school shooter, right? Not that I want these young people to be targeted either by police, but it's actually a white young male with a history of domestic violence, a history of racism, and a history of abusing animals. And those are not the kids that are being targeted by police in our schools and in our communities. It's Black children, right? Who are actually not statistically not likely to like have a random violent school shooting incident. So that really, when we're talking about addressing historical harm, when we talk about history, when we talk about situating our current fears and current policies in context, it's important that we keep that in mind, that Black children, right, are not gonna shoot up a school. That's actually very unlikely to happen. But Black children, millions of them have been ushered into the school to prison pipeline because of that fear and that ideology. And again, it's so important that we lean into research instead of leaning into fear around those things.
Thank you, Bianca, for bringing that in. That's not what I was referring to, but I think that is an important topic and conversation to have. I was more so talking about the kids who bring guns to school, in their backpack, or, I'm not talking about an active shooter. I'm talking about those incidents where we as the board, it reaches us through a expulsion process. And so I think those are the situations. And unfortunately, those are the situations involving our Black and brown kids. And so that is an area that I think we need to talk about, and hopefully we can talk about it more at our next meeting. But yeah, I think Bianca, those active shooter situations, I agree. Law enforcement, research says, having an officer there doesn't prevent it. But it is those day-to-day situations that I'm concerned about that occur in our high schools, and building the capacity within our staff to be able to respond and deal with those with as much reduction in harm for the children involved. That's what I'm referring to. But I think we can have more of a conversation about that next time we meet. It looks like a lot of you are tired. I can see your faces and are sort of exhausted. But Savion, do you have anything to add before we close out?
Nope. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Barb, do we have something left over from our slides that we need to go through? I think we want to talk about quickly the next, let me see if I can bring that up.
Look at that too.
Hey, Gloria, I think we want to give them the guiding questions for next week.
Yeah, let me see if I can bring that up here.
I've got it here.
Okay. Oh, you do? Okay, go ahead. You want to share that?
As soon as I can figure out how to unmute. So the next steps, we have some guiding questions that we'd like for you guys to think about and be prepared to kind of give an answer next time we meet. The first one is, what do restorative practices currently look like in your school, the current state of restorative practices? What are your hopes for restorative practices? What are your hopes for how restorative practices could grow in your school or desired state? Number two, how and when do students experience restorative practices in your school? Students, as for students and staff. And number three is an ad hoc, for the ad hoc committee as a whole. When you think about having SROs not in schools, how can restorative practices fill some of the gaps that may be left? What are the positive things EROs were doing to promote safety, and what can be replicated through restorative practices? I will send these out to everybody.
You know, I say one thing, because I feel like in AU and other folks, please contribute. Like the context of the question is just not okay.
It's
so
not.
the context,
it's terrible.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, AU. I'll let you take it over.
No. It's just really everything that happened in these 2 hours of conversations and on learning with those questions doesn't give, like, that is just taking us in another completely direction. So my suggestion, and I'm sure that everybody from the rest of our team, is to not ask those questions. And maybe if you want to send some questions, maybe we could, like, collectively create some questions to ask. And in whatever, direction is next, but definitely these questions, no.
Eugenia, which questions are you talking about? I mean, what do restorative practices currently look like in your school? I mean, what's wrong with that one?
Well, okay,
what are your hopes for our restorative practices could grow in our school? What's wrong with that one?
Okay, and please, everybody else, please jump in for anything.
I'm just wondering, how and when do
and that from my team, please jump in. I mean, we all know because we all felt it.
I will comment that, like, the number 3 one really is really harmful. I mean, we just talked about how there should be no connection between, SROs or EROs and punishment to restorative justice. So to ask a question about what were the positive things EROs are doing and how can we replicate that? We don't want to replicate anything that the EROs are doing, So I think that's where it's a little like what we just presented seems like these probably were questions, I'm sure, that they make sense before we made the presentation, maybe. But now they don't make sense now that we just presented to you all and gave you hopefully a different understanding of restorative justice and where we're trying to go with it, that hopefully we can have some different discussion. Because I actually think the discussion before it got derailed was good. I mean, I think we were getting to a point where people were understanding and making comments and saying, okay, oh, let me think about this differently. Oh, how does this work in my school? So that's what I think we're having an issue with, is like these seem to be created with a different understanding of what they maybe thought restorative justice was until we just presented to you all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think so. I'm hearing the number 3 is the only question that you find that is concerning. And I think that the 1 and 2 are questions that I want to know, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and I think you even made a correction even yourself tonight, right? Because remember you were saying like restorative practices and you were like, wait, restorative justice, right? So just even that shift of language, right? So just, again, we're just trying to educate that language is important. So even how, these are worded, just tweaking them a little bit. So yeah, we could definitely answer those questions. We would just answer them from the space of what we just talked about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Vanessa, for that. And then if you have additional questions that you want us to discuss at our next meeting, definitely send them to us, and then we can put that as our guiding questions for our next meeting as well. No problem with that at all. And I think I agree. I mean, I think we can take out the number 3 question off there. And if you want to send us 1 or 2 questions that we can add to the first, the other 2, that would be great. Yeah, I really just want us to really move from the theory, the part to actually actions, right? And so that's where I'm getting at, wanting to get us to. Like, I want to know
Yeah.
how we can grow it, right? I mean, what does it look like?
If I can, I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, on a day-to-day sort of, that is what it would be really nice to sort of really move us in that direction. And so one or two other questions would be really helpful for us. Savion?
Yeah, just to jump on that, it really can't be a practice. It's got to be a philosophy and way of life for all of us in these school systems. And I think, as we move forward, we really got to hear more from, what do we have to do to really encourage that amongst staff, either from staff members in this or their union representation right here, because that's the real meat of the work, is trying to get everyone to live and breathe this, as a philosophy in our schools.
Yeah, and I think, I think everyone on this team here, we are a team who come with a very diverse experiences and perspectives. I think that it's really important for us to respect one another. We won't all have the answers. We will disagree. But I think having respectful, hard, tough conversations is going to be important moving forward. And so I appreciate the conversations tonight. I think we can move on to the next slide, or you can take this off. You can stop sharing so I can see everybody. Okay, so moving policies into practice. If you haven't reviewed these policies yet, 4147 and 4400, if you can review them and come back with your thoughts about how these policies can best serve the overall vision of school safety. And what key principles of safety need to be at the forefront when those policies are implemented into practices, and what's missing. I also want to have a conversation about what kind of policies we need to write based on what we learn around restorative justice. And are there policy recommendations around that work that we want the board to approve? And so it is really staying within the 4147 and 4400, but I also want us to explore, like, do we have to write this into policy? And should we write it into policy? So our next meeting is October 22nd. We will go ahead and we'll continue to have our conversations around restorative justice, and we'll talk about budget and policy recommendations. What do we need to do? What do we need to continue the work, and what needs to be revised and strengthened? And then we'll confirm next dates and times, and then also proposed future agenda items with the timeline. Any questions? Concerns?
I have a question really quick, Gloria.
Sure.
If everybody can hear me. Is there going to be a separate conversation for kids with disabilities, just because special education kind of has there's a lot of rules regarding it in the first place? Is that going to be blanketed under this, or is there going to be something more direct when it comes to looking at the policies as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I think we can put that in a future agenda item, and maybe we should put that on, if it's not after the October 22nd meeting, the following meeting after that. And we can discuss that in more detail at our next meeting on the 22nd, as far as when we're going to put it on the agenda. But that's a good point. Thank you, Martha. Anything else? All right, it is 7:03. We finished on time. Thank you so much, Vanessa, Eugenia, Bianca, Orion. Orion, did I say that right?
It's Orion.
Ryan, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Ryan, okay.
Like the constellation system, right?
Yep.
Thank you so much. Great job. I learned so much today from all of you. This was so helpful, and I know now more than ever that we need to implement and really build the capacity around this work within our schools. Savion, any closing remarks?
Nope. It's a philosophy. It's a way of life. It's not just some check marks that we consign it to. It's got to be a way of life, and it's got to be a culture change. So I think that's I think there are ways that policy can help encourage that, but it's got to be a way of life for everybody every day. So.
Yep. All right. Great. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Oh, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Seconded, Savion.
Savion, second. All those in favor, aye. Any opposed? Okay, a motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, team. Gracias, gente.